Okay, I'm going to record on this computer. Make sure I'm recording. All right, folks. Rob Potter here from thepromiserevealed.net, the producer and founder of the Mount Shasta Summer Conference for 9 years in a row now. We've had amazing speakers. And today, I've talked about this in my past recordings that this interview is coming up. And I'm very honored to bring on one of the most profound scientists of our time. And before we go into Dan's stuff here, first of all, let's just say hi, Dan.
I'm happy to be here. You know, Rob Potter is the grandfather of the connection to Venus and the Pleiadians and Fred Bell and lots of things. He's a real connector to the ET history as well. And I'm pleased to be part of the fitting the puzzle of the science together. So we're going to have some fun. All good.
This is amazing. And I'm really more like a baby. We've got the grandfathers would be some of the ancient people who went to Venus, Dante, the poet Virgil, Tannhauser, George Adamski, George Van Tassel, the entire Giant Rock crew. Mostly were in contact with Venusians and stuff. But it's an honor to be here. So I want to talk a little bit about scientists, folks. So every now and then you come along with a great scientist who's inspired or gets information. And these are the breakthrough people with new ideas. And I would count Nikola Tesla. I mean, you've got some of these great physicists. I'm not going to go through the names, but Nikola Tesla comes to mind, Pat Flanagan, Fred Bell was one of those, Alexander Graham Bell, even Westinghouse, and some of these other modern day scientists. And when I was really young with Fred, I was kind of figuring some things out. I was 16 when I met him, and he was a NASA scientist, had a PhD in physics at 17, was fixing television sets at the age of 8, conscripted into the Air Force at the end of his 16th year, and was taken, which was illegal, into the Air Force, and was forced to work for the government and NASA and stuff. But scientists, there's a lot of drone worker bees. There are people who break through new ideas, and nothing's really new. Everything in the universe is already out there waiting to be discovered, or it's been discovered previously on our Earth and we're rediscovering it, or we're reaching out. And Dan Winter is one of those scientists. And I have to caution you here because Dan has so many terms that are scientific, that are difficult. We don't even know what those are. I mean, he talks about phase, conjugate. He'll go into some of these terms, and hopefully we can get to this layman's idea of what this information entails and what it means. Before we do that, I've got my website up here, and I'd like to just share, we are going to have a Mount Shasta Summer Conference and this year. And so I'm going to just share this with you. And the prices are going up probably in a couple of days here. So this website here, I'm going to share with you. We are going to have, the reason I'm doing this, folks, is we have one of Dan Winter's products, or actually two of his products, are going to be on display. Now, we're going to go into pyramids and some of Fred Bell's scalar technology that is more keyed into the individual. But as you see here, the summer conference, I'm just going to take it right down to the speakers and just show you, if you're coming to the conference, if you're interested after hearing this talk, to come and get what's called a Therify and a Quantify healing session right here on this page of this my summer conference. You go there and you go to speakers, and I have this Therify Quantify system is coming to my house, courtesy of Eddie Sharpless, and his partner Angie will be coming Friday, and will be doing sessions on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Actually, Thursday, they're going to be in the room. And folks, I went down there because when I started researching this with Daniel, I went down there and met them. This is an amazing stuff. All the links here, and you can check them out to Dan Winter's sites. So I'm not going to bore you with that, but Dan is going to share some images from his and explain to us what these are. And I'm going to give you a little layman's terms, and I'm sure Daniel's going to correct me because I'm just a junior. It's kind of like I worked with Einstein. Fred was working on time travel and had the technology, but he was killed before he could bring it out. So this system that Dan has is very similar to what Fred Bell called the X1 healing machine. And inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, that was an initiation chamber. And as the initiate would go through, he would leave Saqqara after going through the initiation, where he would sit inside one of those giant sarcophagi and in a place, and he would go all the way down, and he would go through a series of initiations underneath the Great Pyramid, and he would come up. And then as he entered the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber, he would have to come to his knees, where Fred said that he who exalts himself shall be humbled, and he who humbles himself shall be exalted. So you have to drop to your knees to get into this initiation chamber. The sarcophagus, pointed slightly to the west, had a pH balance fluid in there. And Fred Bell had designed this cathode ray tube, which was a technology of the Venusians and the Pleiadians. These 7 cathode ray tubes have different combinations of noble gases, and the initiate would sit down and have his aura scanned in red, so that the deficiencies in his DNA, his aura, would be determined. In the feedback loop, this system would go through a series. It would start off with a sound, light, color, and noble gas irradiation that would establish ketones to connect the monad or the higher self or the Atma or whatever we want to call it, and seal a higher level of consciousness and awareness in the individual. And so Dan, we've had some private discussions. I think Dan is absolutely in the exact same track of this ancient technology of healing. So I'm going to let Dan's prepared some stuff for us here, and I'm just going to mute, and I may raise my hand and go, what the hell does that mean? But I can tell you, if you listen carefully, you know he knows what he's talking about. He talks about with such confidence, such fluidity, and such, I'll just say, literally beyond the normal physics. And he's delving into realms in multiple disciplines. Anyone who wants to really understand physics and healing and the true sciences should study Dan Winter. I've looked at it, and of course, I go cross-eyed with some of the stuff. I learned some stuff with Fred, but Dan is in a whole nother realm. So any other physicists or scientists out there who may be interested, I'm just going to suggest Dan's got so many sites. His biography would take a day to read it. So I'm just going to let you most of you are familiar with him through Elena Danaan. And we're going to bring some of this down into Kundalini with the, I saw him talk about the Dorjis. We're going to talk about the figure eights and different things that I've been doing. So Dan, please share with us however you want to start. Let's go into Therify, and I'm just going to mute. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the kind words. And actually, you set the stage beautifully there, Rob. It's right that, in fact, in the center of the pyramid, actually, when I laid down in the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, and by the way, I did have to get on my knees to get in that room, the lights went out and there was a stillness experience. Later, actually, many years later, when I made a documentary with Sam Osmanagich about the Bosnian pyramids, why literally millions of people were coming there and getting rejuvenation experiences. And we went there to take frequency signatures, actually, of that pyramid and determine very clearly and very simply why you successfully have rejuvenation experiences in the pyramid. And it has to do with what's called, and you mentioned the word, phase conjugate pump wave. And we'll show you a graphic in a minute. It's just a golden ratio frequency series where the adding and multiplying recursively, which golden ratio only allows, called conjugation, which is fractality perfected and implosion perfected. And we'll show the graphic in a minute, as the Schumann harmonics and brainwave Bliss harmonics are exactly that cascade, the caduceus of Hermes. So anyway, those low frequencies of that pump wave, the Schumann cascade, is why the pyramids were called the hummer. They were humming with that cascade, and they were producing an implosive or conjugate still point at the center. Technical term is a longitudinal node, a compression point where the up and down transverse electromagnetic compresses, is aligned, implodes through Planck, and emerges as longitudinal. And that ability to compress transverse up and down electromagnetics down, squeezing in a pine cone, out the tip of that pine cone comes the squirted longitudinal coherence called scalar. And that squirt gun is the reason the pyramid was called a gravity diode. The reason the pyramid helped to stabilize the Earth after the great upset of the Lesser Dryad, and that's a history we want to talk about, when the Federation came here to basically try to eject at that time what were called the Kingu reptilian and the Nebu gray Anunnaki. And that war at the time of the Lesser Dryad, 10 to 12,000 years ago, when the moon first appeared, caused an immense destabilization in the gravity field of the entire solar system. Tiamat blew up. The water caused the Great Flood. Hancock is so brilliant about, yes, everybody tried to put civilization together after the Great Flood, but he doesn't realize that all the people he's talking about trying to fix civilization after the Dryad Flood are various names for Enki and Hermes. Anyway, the point was the task to reassemble the gravity stability of the solar system after that Lesser Dryad Great Flood experiment is precisely the context for the installation of one phase of the pyramid array around the planet, because that implosion of capacitance due to the Schumann cascade, the hummer, makes a compression effect from the transverse wave down to the squirt gun into the longitudinal array. And that longitudinal wave, remember, is the physics of gravity waves per Tom Bearden's equations, is how you stabilize a gravity grid. And that distribution of that longitudinal array around the planet, which looks like this, dodecacosa, those nodes, which is the only places pyramids and labyrinths and cathedrals and telepathy works, is on the nodes of the longitudinal array. And by the way, Therify works better there too. So that's how you got a global wireless power grid functional. That's how you got a gravity diode to stabilize the planet after the last great upset, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what this was now setting the stage for a slideshow I've prepared. Rob nicely suggested that I start with the Therify plasma, which is fun because actually the second slide of the Therify show is actually from the pyramid. So here's the plasma tubes in the Egyptian cartouche, which is the logo for Therify.net. And that logo is also the symbol of the medical profession, the caduceus, which is also Hermes Thoth, because that is a picture of a phase conjugate pump wave. And the still point at the center is the Planck array. Oh, if you're asking a question, just unmute there, Rob.
Okay, sorry. Is that the pine cone there, and that's the scalar wave?
Yes. Well, so we're going to get the actual geometry of that pine cone, which is here, the frequency signature. But let's do the first. So this is Therify.net, and you see those are plasma tubes. And what's happening is we take in this amplifier, we take this phase conjugate pump wave. These are the actual frequencies Antoine Prieur used, and I corrected them by equation to this infrasound harmonic cascade, which is Schumann, which is the brainwave binaural beat of Bliss. This is the infrasound cascade right here. And this is what that cascade looks like. Yes, pine cone caduceus. And this still point at the center of the squirt gun, that's the Planck threshold, where the squirt gun squirts out the cohered longitudinal interferometry. So, and that's why also this device was so good imploding centripetal force for plant growth and rejuvenation in general. So we have a noble gas here, a proprietary noble gas mixture, which is optically conjugate. Then we mix that at 500,000 volts with a complex wave, an RF, sub-RF component, and then this frequency cascade right here is infrasound mixed. And that comes out, this amplifier here, and is dumped into this bifiller Tesla coil here, and emerges as a complex wave all the way from infrasound to RF at 500,000 volts, two waves from the bifiller Tesla coil, 180 degrees out of phase, which is how you conjugate phases, which unfortunately Antoine Priory didn't know what conjugation was, and he didn't know he needed an opposing pair. Anybody who's ever conjugated lasers knew, but Antoine Priory didn't. But anyway, so we get a very magical sweet spot of implosion halfway between those plasma tubes, where the phase conjugate optics from the noble gas are in phase with the RF carrier wave, are in phase with the infrasound modulation. And so you get a very big, broad spectral pine cone kissing noses right there. Now, the reason the Egyptians painted this, they were actually, their primary concern was called raising a Shem unto the Lord. Shem actually means access to a black hole, as in the original name for Egypt, the place of the blue black. But it's the word for alchemy because it means implosive charge collapse, the definition of alchemy, and access to the black hole. Well, the reason raising a Shem unto the Lord was mistranslated in the Bible to be, I'm going to raise an altar to God. No. A Shem was a device to produce an age reversal field. That's what a Shem unto the Lord. And this is what the Egyptian called a Shem, which was the implosion of plasma to produce age reduction, which is discussed on hundreds and hundreds of pages of the Anunnaki history, because everything for them was about age reversal, because we know when they arrived here, they aged catastrophically quickly. And we now know what time reversal is if you studied phase conjugate optics. It actually means negentropy. Anyway, so this is a short intro to, so the Therify actually is dramatically effective at seed growth and plant rejuvenation and people having rejuvenation. And that is the still point that's called a rejuvenation chamber in all the ancient literature. And it's produced by this implosion point, literally called consumed perspective, where the waves turn inside out, which is actually where the ancients used the conjugate point, which John Dee called the scintillation point. And that scintillation is actually where he communicated with ancestors, because the radio to longitudinal interferometry is at that turn inside out conjugate point, literally consumed perspective. Anyway, so that's introduction to Therify. I was going to go to the pyramid images, but did you have any questions at that?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about is in the Great Pyramid, pyramid, fire in the middle, from the Latin.
Exactly. Fire in the middle, right term.
In the midst of the land of Egypt, in the heart and the bearer of Isaiah 19:19, there lies an altar to the Lord. And so I've been inside that Great Pyramid as well. And I sat in there and I did oming. I became friends with Mohammed, the guardian, in there. I've been there 3 times and he always recognizes me. And I spent a lot of time in there. And it's a very powerful place. There's a lot of other technology that was in there. This also, there was a limestone covering that was on the outside and had, I believe it was a gold-plated cap, or a solid
lapis lazuli, and then on top of that was the gold-plated cap. Yeah,
there was a gold-plated cap above that. Lapis
1/57th the volume in each case. Yeah.
Okay, so that was a standing wave. Within there, those tracks that are in the Grand Gallery was actually a tank-like tread that would move up and down. There were gemstones along the top of that would modulate the frequency. So not only did you have the piezoelectrical and the incredible technology involved in the shape and creating free energy from the rotation of the earth, from these gemstones on the frequency, but there was also a type of nuclear reactor. And the eunuchs that did that, it was a service, who were the guardians at that point in time, because they would become infertile because of the the radiation that was in there, but it was creating a type of radiation. It was also doubled as an initiation chamber. And there's many other rooms in there based on the Kundalini, or what you call the Hermes Trismegistus phase conjugate pump that is like the cerebral spinal fluid pump that goes up life force. So,
and there was a layer of mercury in most of the pyramids, which acted as a lens for the capacitance into the pump wave, which had a poisonous component. And like the mercury in the Vimana Nazi bell, there was a radioactive component as well. And in fact, the Ark of the Covenant, which uses implosive capacitance to non-destructively store radioactive, also produced premature blindness in all the caretakers of the Ark, even in Ethiopia today. So there is a parallel, yes.
Wow. And the other thing I'm going to share is Fred Bell's device, the Pleiadian nuclear receptor, I call it the Promise nuclear receptor now, has 144 pyramids in the Fibonacci spiral. And this is a 22.3 megahertz parabolic lens that does some amazing things. So thank you so much. I just wanted to add a couple little snippets in there. So folks, again, you hear these terms, you might want to listen to them again, possibly even look them up. One other question, if you can go back to the slide of the two tubes. One of the things I'm working with some alchemists. If you could share a screen and show those two tubes. I think they're above of the Egyptian inside the pyramid. Inside the, I think it's Zozer's pyramid where I saw those, the light bulbs.
Yeah, it's
there they are. Yeah. Okay. So I'm working with some alchemists now, real alchemists, and I've earned a distributorship. These guys are creating a lot of magical formulas. These guys are 200 to 500, 600 years old, and they're releasing some of these technologies as per Radu Cinemar's book, the Transylvania Sunrise series, which is another story. But I'm noticing behind, to our right, ladies and gentlemen, you see an Egyptian there in a prayer situation. Behind him, on one side, you see another guy holding with his hands. The other side, it looks like what's called a Djed, D-G-E-D, holding up that right tube. Can you explain the significance of that Djed behind the gentleman on the right? It's a symbol in the alchemist formulas.
Yes, actually, both here and here, the term Djed actually simply means plasma projective. And if capacitors are arranged in golden ratio in a stack, that actually is implosive capacitance. And therefore, if it implodes accurately tuned to Planck, the charge implosion will emerge as coherent longitudinal out the center, producing the drain hole through Planck out through center called non-destructive charge collapse, which is the only reason gravity exists. And that implosion is the actual only definition of alchemy, alchem, which simply means non-destructive charge collapse precisely for that reason. Now, many electrical engineers looking at this will say, oh, this is a high voltage insulator to mount the tube on. Well, it's that and a lot more. The point of plasma implosion here, I will raise a Djed as in a Jedi, literally means to become plasma projective. For example, at the moment of lucid dream or death or remote viewing, if the body has become implosive capacitively, now the slides of the Djed towers are not here and it'd take too long to dig them out, but the point is well taken that what we mean by Jedi actually is a structure that is actually a stacked set of stone cones, which are piezo, vibrating with the Schumann infrasound, and they implode that capacitance and they raise a Djed. They plasma project accurately out through the pinhole tuned to Planck, which enables it to shoot a beam of longitudinal coherence. Visualize the Jedi's lightsaber. So Jedi is the right term, and the term for alchemy actually implies precisely and only always that non-destructive charge collapse, because non-destructive charge collapse is the only physics of getting charge between electron shells non-destructively, which is the only real definition of fusion, and in technical physics terms is called nuclear isotope transitions tuned, which have to be tuned actually to the same Planck series. You can read about that in my new book, PlanckFire.com. But that is the physics of alchemy, absolutely. And we actually have equations for isotope transitions for every nuclear isotope transition that's commercially useful in the atomic table, and can predict the frequency and temperature to catalyze all those isotopes. Oh yeah, here's I have the JED. That's what I meant by a JED tower. That's exactly what we're speaking of.
Right. Well, this is an amazing thing that's putting so much together. So I guess we could go into the next one, but before we do that, can you talk about when I went down there, he has the Therify, and they sit at your head and at your feet, and you lay on this table, and I'm going to maybe pull up a video of this in action while you're talking, if I can pull it up in time. But the other one, which is called the Quantify, if you could maybe share a little bit about that one while I look for the image. But folks, I have to tell you, and this is why I was excited to have Eddie come to my conference. I've been in Sandra Michaels' EES system. I was just on a cruise and spent some time in there. There might have been some effects going on there. I did not, it wasn't one of her bigger systems that seemed to work better, according to many people. But there are a lot of people reporting positive results. But when I was in Eddie's he has a little hobbit hut that he built specifically for this. It has crystals, massive crystals on top. It has like a giant crystal ball at the top, bringing in light. It's an incredible little center down there in Redway, California, on the Pacific Northwest coast above Humboldt and that area. And it's kind of, it may be on the node, but it's a little bit off the beaten path. So he doesn't have a lot of customers. But when I went in there and he turned that thing on, Dan, I knew something special was coming. I had prepared myself. I had fasted for a day. I had had some juices. And when I got in there, from the time it started to the time it left, and I think I had a total of 4 hours in 48 hours in the system. And with both of them running, the Quantify comes at you from the side and the other one was coming, and it hit me. I could feel it. It was like the shock wave of a bomb, but it was a plasma healing wave. This thing hit, he turned it on and I felt this, it washed over me. And I didn't want to waste a minute. And I said, okay, thank you. And they left, and I just went down and I just began my spiritual practice. I just looked into my third eye the entire time, was focusing. And it was a very powerful experience for me. Can you explain what that was and share about the Quantify? And I'll just say that after I had the testing done, they have the Hopewell where you test your aura before and after. Mine was off the charts. I think I had 98% on my third eye on this testing thing. And it was just an amazing experience. And that's why I was so excited to have your system come to my conference, where everyone in the room is going to get it on Thursday, and then they're going to know. And I imagine this little system will be well sought after. So let's share the Quantify, what the difference is, and what I was feeling, and how it works.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think you don't mean Hopewell, you mean the BioWell, which is a GDV.
BioWell,
yes,
sorry.
Yeah, so it was a Kurlian-Korotkov GDV BioWell aura analysis. Yes, and the effect is dramatic. In fact, there's examples of that BioWell GDV testing on Therify.net, where also the international sites for Therify are listed, including Eddie's in California. That's great. To explain the difference briefly, so the Therify at 500,000 volts is such high voltage that external modulation can cause crosstalk, and it's actually potentially dangerous and messy. So for external modulation, where people want to play with chakra harmonics and all kinds of tunable You have the Quantify system, which is much lower power, but more flexible and playful. And you can see the main system, Therify.net, has the science there. And at Therify.net/Quantify, you see all the centers that are using both Therify and Quantify, and it can be used separately. And so with Quantify, because it's so tunable, you can tune to a specific chakra, for example, and you can actually have music with it. They're both best motorized with the perfected implosion infrasound, which is the FlameInMind.com world's most powerful bliss binaural beat, the Flame in Sound part of FlameInMind.com, which drives all of our system. And there's actually 5 of them. We have Therify, Quantify, there's PlasmaFire.com, we have a new Piezo Fire, there's a lot of, and 5vibes.com. And all of them use the perfected implosion infrasound, fractalfield.com/implosion sound. And you can see, and it's all simply golden ratio integral exponents of Planck that makes that perfect implosion. So, and people have a lot of fun with Quantify, and it's wonderful. And there's a center in Germany that specializes, and you'll see a lot more about it. So I'm glad that you had that experience. Just while you mention that, I would say that
called the Quantify, developed by the scientist Dan Winter, plasma scalar healing devices.
there we go. That's a nice picture of the Quantify. So that's a modulation coil. It's actually a smaller Tesla coil under the Quantify tube there. And that's nice. I could say that we believe by actual trials that approximately 30%, particularly of women, if they're in if they're lying down position with the tubes at head and foot, approximately 30% of women will often have some kind of euphoria bliss experience in the Therify. Also, approximately 30% of people, particularly those who are able to get relaxed, will report some sharpening of vision afterwards, actually, and we teach that physics. Also, after multiple trials in 3 different years, the majority of people after Therify will measure a dramatic deroulé, declumping of the live blood cells after Therify. Dramatic declumping of blood cells, fairly analogous to Pat Flanagan's famous crystal energy drops, crystal water drops, which are basically epitaxial water, which again is capacitive implosion, which is what allows the cells to stand by themselves. So there's a lot to say about that. But yes, the summary of, why did you have a euphoria experience?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, is that
time for 3 days? I felt so clear. And if you do what's called a dark field blood test,
Yeah.
you can see your blood's kind of clumped. And what he's talking about, everything will be free and flowing freely.
That's right. And you see the 3 different examples of those blood cell trials are all at Therify.net in the blood test section. You can actually see the films of that. And by the way, the only few people who did was, I think it was something like 1 in 10 did not get the deroulé in the blood. And we found after a questionnaire that the people who did not have the beneficial blood effect, there was a minority, were actually those who reported they were not able to get fully relaxed. Very interesting. So part of the skill of the therapist is the skill to get people feeling very safe and relaxed. And we actually learned a mistake we made in that if you have multiple people in the room that are not, lovers or tantric or something, it inhibits the ability for people to feel totally safe and relaxed. So creating a very safe space is part of the skill, because the skill to be able to relax is the skill to get conductive and therefore implode. So these things kind of fit together. But why you have a bliss experience is basically the body's, I mean, it's fundamental physics. The physics of consciousness is amazingly simple when you ask kids who are seeing without their eyes, when they get that same infrasound in their brainwave, and then they close their eyes and they see without their eyes, they say, I saw a vortex appear inside my head, a plasma tube. Every child says that. They go into bliss state and they can see without their eyes. And by the way, then they start seeing ancestors, because that's longitudinal interferometry, physics of clairvoyance. But anyway, the physics of consciousness and the only physics of consciousness, which is the only thing that explains how you could take this with you when you leave your body and when you die. And if you can't explain that, then you don't know what the physics of consciousness is. That's a plasma vortex. And when the plasma vortex gets more centripetal, need I say anything else? So whatever adds inertia to the imploding plasma vortex makes it more centripetal is the cause of life, is the cause of consciousness, is the cause of gravity. And that is called Planck fire, Planck, fractal non-destructive charge collapse, planckfire.com, the title of my new book. It just happens to be. And so that implosive non-destructive charge collapse, when the ability of charge to collapse is facilitated, that causes consciousness. Hello.
Right. Well, I'm going to add something here to bring it a little more in for the yogis and for how this actually works. Folks, I read Carlos Castaneda when I was very young, and I realized that I saw the luminous egg. I had for a moment of clarity in using some of his techniques, and I saw these white lines of force connecting everything. It was a vision moment, and I could see an auric egg around a friend of mine, and I actually saw below my navel there is what they call will, and I won't go into the metaphysics of this interdimensional light body, but in one of the crop circles, there's a butterfly man. And if you look at someone, you have a North Pole and you have a South Pole at the base of the spine. The North Pole is in the third ventricle of the brain, and it's a pineal pituitary. And actually, you are like a magnet of this energy going out. So if you look at it in two-dimensionally from the front, it looks kind of like a butterfly of energy, and it comes up through the spine. But in reality, it's a toroid 360 around you. Your life force, your kundalini, that which keeps you alive. And Dan is going to go into this maybe in the pyramids about the kundalini and the life force and this kind of stuff. But I was taught Kriya Yoga by Babaji. He appeared to me in Oregon in 1978, and I was taken into a tent where he taught me Kriya Yoga. He's very skinny. His hair goes way back, looks just like the images in Autobiography of a Yogi. And he turned his eyes back in his head. I could see the white, and then I actually watched his eyes even rotate further. His eyes were looking directly into his, the cavity of the brain where you have the pineal and pituitary very close. And he recommended putting the tongue back and making connection, if you can, behind the epiglottis, but making a connection and entering into absolute stillness and silence while breathing and creating a circulation of light as you breathe in and out between the earth and the heavens. And by doing this, you reach this still point flame of the mind in there. And that's what I inside
and that the breath could be the Mayer wave 10-second, the 5-second is the perfect breath because that's the HRV LF and implosive to Planck as well. What HeartMath calls coherence is the 10-second breath. And that touch point in the back roof of the mouth is actually the connector, which links the dripping nectar of sweetness, and that the infrasound phonon of the sacrocranial pump is what's delivering that nectar to the high brain through the amygdala, which is the mouth of the serpent. And the harmonics of that whole series, right down to the spine liquid pump harmonics, the sacrocranial harmonics, are all idealized in the equation to the point where, and I have a slide here, right here on that, but the point where the actual then measured high frequency sangreal ringing in the ears that Benthoff and I measured of Kundalini experiencers, the ultrasonic ringing in the ear harmonics, we calculated those and put those to equations. So we even know why the ringing, it's the completion of the ventricle horns from the sacrocranial pump wave. And as Upledger proved, if your spine liquid is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed because that is the definition of bliss process. And it all is entrained to the breath. So actually, it sounds like you got a very good physics lesson that day as well.
Yeah, it's the Amrita, if you can do that, can actually cause that to happen. I was very young at the time. He was in a full lotus. But for people to understand this is why meditation is important. And I'm just going to say two things with the Venusians said there's two things. One is to talk to God as you would a child. This is prayer. This is to connect to the Creator, to try to find the truth in yourself and in your life without all of the human judgments, fears, perceptions, to seek and have a direct Gnostic gnosis experience with your reality in real time, which goes beyond the brain. And the second one was to enter the silence.
Yeah. And then silence is a burning flame, and it ultimately it's lightening up your tailbone. And I would say one more thing to confirm what you just said is that when I first had intense Kundalini for many years, and we have biophysics as well, the goldenmean.info/Kundalini, made many documentaries on the biophysics. But I will say that, I didn't get to the gamma very well in the brainwave, but I got to the infrasound theta and delta very well. And so I got more clairaudience than clairvoyance. And when I started hearing the voices of ancestors, actually, the words I heard were the sounds of a child, very young, a baby speaking many times. Actually, it's quite literally true. The voice, that deep inner voice, starts with the voices of a child. I literally experienced that. It said, vociferous, be a voice for us. Like a voice whispering in your head. And then when you start to hear the ancestors speak and you realize it's literally the sangreal, the voices ringing in your ear, and Valerie knows which ancestor is calling by which ears. I mean, but anyway, so I think I should do this slideshow.
Yeah, let's go into the pyramid, folks. Before we do that, folks, I brought in David Adair in one of my lectures. David Adair is an incredible scientist. He talked about a figure-8 fusion engine that he created. His mother was a secretary for General Ramey. General Ramey sent a team down to a farm where he worked on this rocket ship, and they actually had a launch from this farm. I think it was I forget where. I want to say Nebraska or somewhere in the Midwest. And Ramey says, "Put it down here." And he says, that's a desert. He says, that's not going to be good to land in the sand. He says, "Son, just put it right here." And they watched the lift off, and they got in a plane and flew there. And the rocket ship was going at an incredible rate of speed, and it landed, I think, in 5 or 10 minutes. And David Adair continued to work for the Air Force. So his connection with Fred, Pat Flanagan and Fred Bell were very close and worked a lot. And Pat Flanagan stopped making a plastic pyramid because my girlfriend went over to Fred when I was 17. She was 16. She goes, "You shouldn't make pyramids out of plastic." And Pat Flanagan comes over and goes, "Fred, what are you talking about? This girl's saying you can't make pyramids out of plastic." And Fred said, "Come with me." And they went to his thing, and they came back an hour later, and Pat Flanagan pulled all of his plastic products because plastic produces a positive ion.
Well, it's a dielectric constant. That there can be certain ceramics, but you need a super dielectric, which you almost never will get with plastic. So the Platonians were right on that. And I knew Patrick very well, and his alchemist, actually, Chaz, Priestess Alchemy, he met through me, who then made his gold powder, and we had many adventures.
Right. So Pat and Fred, Dan and Fred, David Adair and Fred. So let's share a little bit how you met Fred. Fred had to keep his relationship with a David secret for both of their sakes. But share, I think you spent some time with Fred, and you came up and
he took me up in his living room and pointed out the window and said, "That's where Semjase comes in." And then he started showing me the identical to what you have in your living room right there, all his pyramid arrays. But I think the physics of implosive capacitance and how those arrays work in terms of the longitudinal array physics is really what, it started me on that path to have spent some time with Fred, who everyone knows his famous book, The Death of Ignorance. And so actually what Death of Ignorance was, in part, was about the actual physics of electrical propulsion, which is part of the way a pyramid will implode capacitance and directionally spit out a longitudinal wave, which at that time they didn't know. That's the definition of a gravity wave. Until you see, Beard's equations, people don't understand that. So basically the fact, it actually stands to reason. Obviously, where an atom succeeds in getting centripetal, the definition of gravity, for example, this is a centripetal, the centripetal component of the electric field around an atom will never, ever be the transverse EMF component. Nope. No, the only possible compressional component that could implode at the center of an atom, hint, making gravity, would be the longitudinal component where the wave of compression is parallel to the direction of propagation. So it's obvious by inspection for anybody who's even thought about it why the gravitational wave is specifically the longitudinal component of the EMF. You don't even have to inspect Tom Bearden's equations in gravitobiology, where, by the way, he's proving this is why plants grow. you put a copper plate on the roof and a wire to your basement, another copper plate, and the plants grow beautifully in the pitch black because they're getting the longitudinal wave from the sun. Hint, why they grow.
I got to tell you, that was what Fred told me to do. I had a scientist, our biology teacher said, let's do an experiment. He was definitely old school, basic scientist. And Fred said, take one of my pyramids and you're going to buy a little hanging plant and you're going to put it in a closet. And so we did it. Mine was a little bit longer than others, but we put it in a closet where it was dark all the time. Occasionally they opened it, but my plant kind of turned white because there wasn't the photosynthesis for the green. There was kind of like an albino in a sense, but it was stronger. The segment lengths were healthier and longer inside the pyramid. And
the implosion is the growth. That's the point. And even those who've studied it realize the ancients didn't use their sacred sites like Stonehenge, stone circles, and their pyramids. One of the primary things they used them for was causing seeds to germinate, which, by the way, Therify.net does very well. So you trigger longitudinal implosion, which, by the way, is the physics of lucid dreaming as well. And we have the frequencies, and that's another story. But I think we should do this slideshow here because that'll explain more. And
yeah, I want to say, even if people saw Tom Bearden's equation, they wouldn't grasp it or understand it. A lot of these things he's talking about, we know he knows what he's saying, but it's difficult to actually put it together. One of the things we did with that device there, we connected it to a floating ground Tesla coil. There's insulation beneath those pyramids. I just did a kind of an infomercial with a professional photographer, but the scalar waves come off of that as in Fred Bell's book, Rays of Truth and Crystals of Light, which was another great book that Fred had. And we found the plants go off the hook. I work with a couple mushroom growers and some cannabis growers, and they increase their growth unbelievably by utilizing these pyramids with Tesla coils running in there, creating these the scalar waves. We utilize the crystals and some lasers in there too. Let's talk about how this can relate to someone in their practical life. Maybe you could talk, we can share the pyramid energy, and then I'd like you to kind of analyze some of Fred's products that I sell, because I'm always open to learning and listening.
Yeah, well, and there's a great parallel that, the imploder.com, the piezo vortex of that exact same vortex with the same piezo harmonics in the imploder.com, that Schauberger's dream vortex, also dramatic, like 30 to 50% growth effect in hemp, et cetera. So it is that implosion, that added centripetal force. And it's by inspection quite obvious. A seed cannot grow unless it really sucks. It can't germinate. So the first move the seed ever made has to suck. Well, what causes it to suck? Take a guess.
A centripetal vortex.
That's right. So by taking your seeds and zapping them with Therify, it's famous. You can put them in a pyramid, and you get there's lots of books on that. But if you put them in Therify, you get that same effect. So, but I think the slideshow will make a lot of this clear, and we are going to run out of time. But I just wanted to do here's the figure 8 graphics from the Akta Yoga. So, when you turn these figure 8s and actually this Lou DeBourbon, it's goldenmean.info/Yoga, and you did this figure 8 movement. It's actually 3. Well, it first starts with 3 perpendicular figure 8 movements you make with your dantian, your belly button, basically. And then you do that in 3 perpendicular. So you have a total of 6 perpendicular double dorjies you make with your dantian. And actually, there's witnessed accounts of people actually disappearing after doing this figure 8 exercise, as in Ananda Bosman from Norway. And the physics is actually because you implode into the longitudinal array. And this is intro to our measurements of how famous Jean-Charles Moyenne was able to generate that same harmonic series in his EEG, and he bilocated multiple times with witnesses. So that ability to enter the longitudinal array, the physics of stargates, it's all about that implosive impedance matching to the longitudinal node where you turn inside out. But that's a bit of advanced stuff. But I just want to say that figure 8 motion, there's a lot of beautiful graphics there at goldenmean.info/Akta Yoga in the Double Dorji story.
That's a really good thing, because instinctively I've been doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the sacrocranial pumping. And so actually what Ananda did was you did those 6 perpendicular figure 8 motions with the dantian, and then Lou DeBourbon dramatically developed ability to juggle, fabulous proprioception. But then you do it with the heart and then with the crown, which is actually dangerous. But if he did it with this, and there were multiple witnesses, he physically disappeared. And I'm not recommending this, but I'm saying it's possible multiple times. And that implosion, that's actually an introduction to the physics, stargates, and portals. Simply put, all action at a distance is that implosive coherent longitudinal interferometry. And that's the advanced stuff. It's not where we want to go today, but at least I'm giving you this background that once you start to learn that figure 8 motion in the advanced material. So if I may, since we're going to run out of time, the slides we prepared for today, this is the actual harmonics by measurement of the spine liquid pump right here. So here you have the spine liquid pump frequencies, the sacrocranial ostial, which are literally the tidal waves of the spine liquid pump from Upledger in Florida. And notice all harmonics on this page are golden ratio multiples of Planck. And this is the Schumann harmonics. These are the brainwave harmonics. This is the infrasound harmonics that we use for Therify, and these are also the Bliss harmonics. You see, it's all the same harmonic cascade. It's not only the driver of Kundalini, it's the driver of everything implosive. Example, here are the famous sacrocranial harmonics, the only physics of Kundalini, the spine liquid pump driver. And notice, okay, so the equation predicts the frequencies in red, Planck times golden ratio exponents. And in green, you have the famous sacrocranial tidal harmonics from all the Upledger literature on what drives the spine liquid pump, the only physics of Kundalini. And look how the equation fits. And the most important wave there, the 0.1 hertz Mayer wave, 10-second, is the most important resonance frequency in the body and the blood, and the only thing heart math calls heart coherence, and that's the 10-second breath. And you see how that's perfect. So the physics of Kundalini is all behind this driver, which is Planck fire, perfected fractal charge collapse.
Right. So can I ask you a question? That 10-second, is that inhale and exhale, or inhale in, hold 10, exhale 10?
So classically, it's a 5-second in, 5-second out, or so the total cycle is 10 seconds. So it's literally 0.1 hertz, which is the most important frequency probably in the body, certainly the most important frequency in the blood, which is why it's called the Mayer wave. And it is the definition of the LF component of heart rate variability, which is the definition of how you, the only real fast way to measure immune health is that harmonic inclusiveness.
Right.
And so this shows the equation in blue for Planck times golden ratio, and in green, the actual known Schumann harmonics. This is the driver for not just human bliss, the brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, and the only driver for what was called the Hummer, the only driver for pyramids making a gravity diode and global wires power. This is why it worked, because actually Hermes went to so much trouble to get the Schumann harmonics so close to a phase conjugate pump wave, which is why it's called a caduceus. At that time, they called this planet taming that plan, and we'll explain why in a moment. It has to do with you create that centripetal force and you modulate the planet's ability to hold
Right.
energy.
Can we go a little more into layman's terms about the pyramid energy itself?
Yes. Okay. But let me just finish the thought here. So here you see the connection made between the alpha, beta, 5 harmonics and golden ratio definition of bliss being exactly the Schumann cascade phase conjugate pump wave. And you see that arc angle, that's the cone of implosion choreographed. And this actually is related to the why golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, because it's the only way to stabilize gravity. But getting to your question, practical pyramid physics. This is from Charlie Zeiss, very useful. So the 76-degree angle, which is the base angle of Russian and the base angle of Egyptian and the peak angle of Russian pyramids, is because only that allows the cascade to be imploded by golden ratio, which is the only way to spit out a coherent longitudinal, even Schauberger's perfect vortex cone. So this ability to make a gravity diode, because there's infrasound piezo, golden ratio Schumann cascade, driving the transverse wave down into a longitudinal wave at the peak, named the gravity grid. So that's why it's a gravity diode, and that's how the global wireless power worked. So the electrical function of pyramids, this is from the film I made with Sam, who had millions of people experiencing rejuvenation in pyramids, and we did the summary of the physics. So it was called a Hummer because it's humming with the phase conjugate pump wave, the Schumann, and that it's a gravity diode because it's imploding transverse, which doesn't make gravity, into longitudinal, which is gravity coherence. And it's implosive seed trigger, it's a rejuvenation, age reverse. It is global wireless power because when you pump into the longitudinal ray, which they used mercury to lens that. And it's a key to plasma projection, for aura exit, for star inhabiting, why the tubes pointed to Orion and Sirius. And also can serve as a plug access for longitudinal charge of propulsion craft.
Wow, this is amazing. So I want to, if I could, you had mentioned the Fibonacci series, and I'd like to go, if you could, take us into a basic pyramid shape. Of obviously, folks, there's so much physics in here. This was the Great Pyramid was created by master physicists of the Anunnaki originally, in combination with the humans at that point, in about 13,500 years ago, according to the Akashic records, as witnessed by the pseudonym Radu Sinamar, in charge of the Transylvania.
Peter Moon's wonderful. I agree, and he was right on the course there, and that was all about.
Peter just acted as a translator. He has no knowledge.
Well, he had that experience at Montauk, and I knew the Preston and the boys there, so we had a lot of connections. Yeah, but I think to get to the core principle, and you're right to want to get to the core principle geometrically. If you look at why Kepler said planetary orbitals had to be nested platonics, now we know he was right. In fact, the planetary orbitals, which are dominate planetary orbital radii, for example, Earth and Venus, are dominated by golden ratio because, first of all, the only way to nest platonics is to use golden ratio. That's how dodecae nests inside Icosah, for example. And the only way to put a tetracube inside a dodec is also golden ratio. And the only way to make gravity is golden ratio. That's called non-destructive charge collapse, the only cause of gravity. So if you want to create stable gravity, you need platonic nesting, because that's non-destructive charge collapse, which, by the way, is exactly the SPDF subshell orbital geometries, is the platonic nest, because the platonic nest of atoms creates gravity the same way planets do. So Kepler was right. And now you see the tetracube, your tetracube, right in the center there, because that's tuning the charge collapse at the implosion point. And this, there's another model that how then the perfected distribution of that charge when the nodes are locked together in a fractal dodecaecosa, the geometry of DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and every living protein, is because locking together at golden ratio nodes like the dodecaecosa Earth grid means that when you bump one wave at one vertex, the inertia can travel between all the nodes locked into that stillness. and I do mean stillness. When you feel that locked, you feel a vice-like grip. It feels like the lightning going through your tailbone is ice cold. Have you had that feeling?
There's something similar, but I want to look. You'll notice here, you see the star, and that's the device I'm wearing here. This is my own personal receptor called the star.
Yes,
My,
exactly.
based on the Venusians. Now, people think that the Masons were bad and that it's a pentagram, but actually, the Freemasons were working directly at that point in time. The Freemasons and the Illuminati were secret positive societies. The bad guys took those names over.
And actually, Venus-Earth orbit's relationship.
Let me finish, because I want to talk about the layout of Washington, D.C. The White House is at the pointed star. This is where the Venus comes closest to the Earth and is viewed. It creates that star. And the owl actually was also a spiritual symbol of knowledge as well. So, that's important. I want to, Fred Bell, we have these pyramids, and I just thought I would, because I want to ask you, you to share with me. So, this is the shape of a diamond. This is a shape, the gold molecule is like this. So I wanted to talk about the different, the Russian pyramid. Fred said that all pyramids have energy and shape. But for the human body, the Great Pyramid at 52 degrees, 59 minutes, and 19 seconds is the optimum for life force for the human. I said, what about the pointed pyramids? He said, those are better for mental activity. So, people go into alpha state by just wearing these. They don't have to think about it. We did a galvanic. I went to Thelma Moss at UCLA in 1979. I think it was 19 years old. And we did experiments with these pyramid systems and scalar waves. We saw huge plasma things. She had this very large plate where she'd put, people, a psychic healer here. It would go from the points. We used to do those Carillion photographs where you come out a picture. So what I want to ask about, you had a picture of the DNA. So the Pleiadians gave us this device, and I want to hear your explanation. And what happens, Dan, is we can do a muscle test on someone. Okay. I can test you and see how strong you are, and you're strong. Then I can give you some airplane glue. And you hold it with this hand, and I muscle test you. As you breathe, your arm goes weak because you're receiving toxins. We're receiving toxins and ELF and all kinds of assaults on our auric egg or our toroidal field, not including a lack of attention and focus and all this stuff. And when we put one of these devices, 144 pyramids in a concentric Fibonacci spiral with a wave filter that focuses the microwaves and the negative energy, and it's filtered through the back. What you see is a yin-yang single, or NASA calls it a Cassegrain wave trap. We put it on the body, and the muscle test by breathing toxins is the person is strong. 22.3 megahertz is one of the primary separation points of the DNA in the replication process. It sends out a scalar wave and calls in the appropriate amino acids to reproduce. And Fred was maintaining, as the Pleiadians and the Andromedans explained to him, that the telomeres, everything is disrupted by the electronics. So our aging process is being increased by the negative technology. So I'd like you to share how this stuff works with the DNA. And I got one more picture here, folks. If you look on the side, this is the Andromedan holographic projector. So can you explain how wearing this device can literally, in a way, make me impermeable to breathing toxins where my body stays strong? Fred says it's like a frequency. Everything Dan's talking about is frequency, folks. And this has to do with thoughts and your genetics of your parents, your environment, the food you eat, but primarily your thoughts, your environment. All of these things affect your body. So how does this technology of these pyramids in the body strengthen the body when exposed to toxins. Many other people have all kinds of jewelry devices and designs. We were the first ones. We got it in 1975. We couldn't even replicate this till 1980. And now with 3D printing, it's incredibly powerful and accurate. Please share with these work.
It's very relevant. Well, first of all, in terms of the effect on DNA, the vertical versus height versus diameter of one ladder rung 10 code on DNA is actually Golden ratio times Planck, exactly. And that piezoelectric helix of DNA, if in the presence of the phase conjugate pump wave, named the Schumann harmonics, identical with the brainwave harmonics during the moment of bliss, perfectly in phase with the spine liquid pump harmonics, it's all the same low frequency phase conjugate pump wave, that would increase the DNA helix ability to implode. Literally what happens is it braids recursively, thread to rope to fat rope, and turns inside out. It implodes and spits out the longitudinal wave coherence named a soul, named what you take with you when you lucid dream or die. It's a longitudinal coherent wavefront. It's called the Ba from the Ka, the rainbow light body, the Keshan body. There's many names for it, but that longitudinal onset coherence from implosive recursive braiding of DNA in the presence of that correct cascade. And you're right, there would be an RF, in fact, a microwave component. I don't have the slide here, but the actual microwave component, the way we measured Kundalini in the microwave, 1.91 angstrom, which is the wavelength of adenosine diphosphate, the most important molecule in the body. So it's actually a Golden ratio exponent of Planck, exactly. So the reason you can measure Kundalini in the microwave is also similar because the ADP spits out the coherent longitudinal, all part of the broad spectral conjugation of bliss, actually. So it's true that if you get that wave massively implosive, it will become negentropic and self-sorting, exactly what you're talking about, Rob, for sure. And by the way, this was part of the introduction to how the Koski-Frost crystal made 800 times its own weight in gravity, the physics of what was called the warp propulsion in Star Trek. We now know dilithium. Lithium niobate was called in Star Trek. It's the dilithium. It's actually a phase conjugate pump wave up a helix of quartz, performing a very similar function. And that was called warping space because it's actually making gravity on a broad scale. And here's a picture of that crystal making 800 times its own weight in gravity. Koski-Frost, fractalfield.com said propulsion in Elizabeth Donovan's book, Glimpses of Epiphany. So all of these are examples of a phase conjugate pump wave making coherent longitudinal and spitting out centripetal force and negentropy and, as you say, self-organization. And here's a picture of that crystal in the famous ET craft from Elena Danaan. And here's the crystal at the center, and here's the phase conjugate pump wave, the carbon nanostructure, dumping in a phase conjugate pump wave and making warp propulsion. Is similar to understand what's the famous EM drive, the electromagnetic drive in physics. It's actually a caduceus of microwave, which should be tuned to Planck by my equation. And when it implodes, it spits out the coherent longitudinal, which is why the EM drive makes gravity and should be tuned by my equation.
So what's happening here is these pyramids are, there's a hand about. So we have these pyramids here. So they're imploding the DNA and tightening it up and creating that stronger field within the body to somehow ignore the toxins coming in, to override the disruption in the signal. Is that correct?
Well, yes, the slides are at goldenmean.info, says DNA manifesto, but we actually measured the thread, braid to string, braid to rope, braid to fat rope, that onset of implosive recursive braiding coherently in DNA, which is the only real physics of bliss. We measured it triggered by coherent EKG and EEG because the DNA implodes, and then the DNA literally becomes toroidal and implosive. And that's the moment you find yourself able to lucid dream, which indicates you now have a soul and you will take something when you die because you ride that coherent longitudinal propagation into the array called the collective unconscious.
I see 1.618. That is the actual time it's a relationship how Sirius A revolves around Sirius B. So there's
we were the first to write the equations, which proved that golden mean ratio is the generalized.
That's what 3.14.
Well, yes, but the point is that golden ratio cascade is the definition of beauty because it is the wave mechanics definition of max constructive wave interference. The only solution to compression, the solution to compression is the solution to every problem physics has ever had. What is gravity? What is life? What is immortality? What is soul? What is computer evolution? It's all the name for the solution to compression, which is also the name for what alchemy is. So when you realize, when we wrote the equations to prove why golden ratio is a generalized solution to constructive wave interference, which is the proof of why that is the cause of gravity, life, consciousness, alchemy, and negentropy. So
it's like Daniel has actually started a whole new physics. You see from the slides he has here, there's so much information. And I know that, for me, 90% of this is going over my head because I'm not a mathematician, but you can see this level of physics and what's happening. And the governments have known, and I would say individual levels, they've taken brain trust of individuals and utilized a lot of this technology in secret. But here we have it literally in one man, and thank God he's not working for the bad guys. So we have this tremendous amount of knowledge here. And I wanted to ask you one more question with this particular device. This was given by the Andromedans. This device here is called the Andromedan Holographic Projector. And somehow this kind of, Fred said it's hard to explain, but it's a short paper on it. But I said, how does it work? And he goes, well, it fixes things before they happened. So when you wear this, if you have some negative experiences coming in your life, for some reason, you see the figure 8 on the back there.
Is that amethyst, those purple?
Yeah, this is amethyst. We have 12 different stones you can put in here.
The amethyst would be excellent for that. The physics of amethyst is relevant. The geometry of citrin is an iron-doped quartz, but it's only a temperature differential that converts the yellow citrin to purple amethyst. And the amethyst actually, and I knew Dora Kunz, whose husband Fritz Kunz wrote the book in Theosophy on the esoteric uses of gemstones, but amethyst was famous for preventing drunkenness. and the physics works because the iron-doped silicon dioxide quartz helix is precisely maximally implosive and therefore grounding, literally the opposite of drunkenness, in exactly the reason Enki got so damn excited. He arrived here with green blood, same as chlorophyll-based blood, the same as Jean-Charles Moyen saw his blood was green. And you switch one atom in there, and then suddenly you have hemoglobin, iron-based blood. And Enki thought, oh, the potential to make a vaccine for the Orion Wars. And when he designed us, he called us Adamic, meaning red, because he was so excited about that iron-based blood he hadn't got to play with before. He thought he could make a vaccine for the Orion Wars, and he did, because iron-based blood has a potential to actually hold more ampage in that helix of implosion.
That's actually pyramid and octahedron in the center, and there's a heme chain of iron that looks like actually shaped like a aircraft engine as it rotates through the blood in the ferrous and ferric exchange. That's where the pyramid produces negative ions. That's why people get high. When I was in Bosnia with J.J. Hurtak, we filmed massive orbs going through our group, and the people love to work in there. And the healing, the negative ion count in there is tremendous. With the pyramid, you can find no negative ions. You can only find the negative ions in the effect of neutralizing pH, wine, things.
And the physics of Therify is only a Therify plasma cloud, which is healing, is only a large negative ion cloud. That's all it is, but a big one. So hospitals have proven, if you got negative ion wind, you can heal just about anything. Spinal meningitis, no problem. Use a strong negative ion wind. Well, if you can make a strong negative ion cloud stand there, which is called Therify.net, because it's massively impressive. It gets more broad spectrum. So negative ion wind is profound, actually. It's very appropriate to study because hospitals know.
Yeah, they do it for burn and
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff there. It's really incredible.
Yeah. But just to review, I'm running out of my time window for this conversation.
Okay, yeah.
But just to review, the core idea here was that the golden ratio geometry of the pyramid being piezo means the low frequency pump wave, phase conjugate pump wave, Schumann cascade, the Hummer, means that there's a pumping action, which is imploding the natural resonance of the Earth into a centripetal angle, the 76-degree critical angle of the pyramid base or tip. And that means that the transverse EMF of the environment is being squeezed down that cone accurately to implode into the longitudinal. And that is why it's called a gravity diode. And that's how and why it's stabilizing gravity and atmosphere. So they put the pyramids at the tetrahedral latitudes for those reasons, because you could modulate the spin rates of planets to more be in phase with zodiacal spin. And when the zodiac spin comes into phase with planetary spin in the same phase conjugate golden ratio, that stabilizes gravity and atmosphere, which was called planet taming in this famous book, 2/3, David Myers and David Percy, why they're at the tetrahedral latitudes. And this made the black holes at the galactic core, and this is why it was called Antarian conversion. We don't have time for all these slides, but the core physics, the very core physics here of the entire conversation I hope to introduce was that when that cone angle is set up correctly, pyramids being just one example, that the transverse wave, EMF, entering on the left, does translation of vorticity non-destructively and spits out a longitudinal wave on the right, named gravity. And the ability to compress that transverse into more orderly longitudinal at the squirt gun point of the pine cone, called Planck, is the ability then to make that longitudinal wave, which is the definition of gravity wave, where the compression wave is parallel the direction of propagation, unlike the transverse, where the wave is perpendicular to the direction of propagation. And when the longitudinal waves converge in conjugation, called four-wave mixing in optics, and how Therify works, and how all negentropic forces are generated, that implosion that's enabled, the definition of phase conjugation, definition of all negentropy, the definition of all self-organization, definition of all rejuvenating systems, is because of that implosion. So pyramids were set up to do that gravity diode function, because when you could pump inertia into the longitudinal array and then distribute that at the longitudinal nodes, it's the only definition of global wireless power which worked at that time. It did not work for Tesla because he had the frequencies wrong and the nodes incorrect.
I want to say one thing here, folks. We're running out of time, but Dan, as you hear, is incredibly. I mean, this information is really for physicists, but you can understand by his knowledge, his fluidity, that this is a new thing. I'm going to share here. You can see the negative ion shower that we created. I have added to Fred's design here. I put a large amount of crystals around this. And by the way, Semyasi told us, she said, the quartz crystal is the perfect synthesis of spirit and matter in zero time. Dan could probably explain that, but this is a pyramidal array, and this is a floating ground Tesla coil, and it creates 40 kV, and we hang this over, it's not on the ceiling, but we have these different devices. This grounds out energy, but what this does is this creates an ion shower. So I have a whopping 40 kV. And in my video that I did yesterday, I put those irradiator systems Fred called a quad system that you witnessed in his living room. in there, and this rains negative ions. And you turn all of these on, you can connect the Omnion, everything. The entire room becomes a negatively ion charged plasma field. And with the pyramid and the conjugal implosion, centripetal stuff that he's talking about, you actually lay next to a crystal and you focus your intent. Like the King's Chamber, that beautiful device with all the crystals in it, the thing, it has stones from the Great Pyramid, from Hawaii, Haleakala, Mount Shasta. It has stones from Island of the Sun, Island of the Moon, the Bosnian Pyramid, China, various sacred site locations. So you're interfacing with the Earth's grid system all around the planet in the northern and the southern hemisphere. And you can continue to gather stones and add them to that device. And the King's Chamber actually raised up and down its physical shape in the capacitance with the Earth and the various sacred geometry, gravity of the planets. So this device becomes a manifesting chamber. I'm actually getting ringing in my ears right now. I guess my pump is working. But by laying next to this crystal and visualizing what you would like to manifest, start at the new moon where this is above the crystal, and as you lower in phases, every couple of days you lower it until the full moon, it's over your master crystal. I have a 80-pound master crystal, this big one. It took me 3 years to purchase it. They're quite expensive. But these devices are the practical application on a certain level of Daniel's thing. His Therify is a more advanced version of this.
Well, and it's very parallel. You're right. And in fact, massive negative ion wind, it becomes a plasma cloud at higher amplitudes. And in fact, we're using 500 kilovolts. So, but our device is not cheap as well. But you were developing less. We have new piezofire.com. But one more thing, I just wanted a closing thought here. You know, a lot of our Therify centers are doing remote healing successfully. And we teach that not as a mystery, but as simple physics, that that the ability to do remote healing is improved if both sender and receiver are at an Earth grid magnetic line node crosspoint called a longitudinal array. Also, this works better at sunrise and sunset. It works better at equinox and solstice. It works better when the four directions, because this is where compression is enabled, and therefore longitudinal impedance matching is possible. So that longitudinal array actually is the physics of all action at a distance, and the physics of every spiritual story starts with understanding the science of action at a distance. And Einstein called that spooky for the same reason he never figured out why an object falls to the ground, because a longitudinal wave answered both questions.
Yeah, I heard you talk about Schrodinger's cat, and Fred talks about that. We'll do that for another call. But I'd love to have a conversation with you in a layman without the science stuff. But I love the science. I'm grasping probably a little more than others because I work with Fred. I don't have the math, but he explained to me a lot about wave and strength theory and how they're both at the same time and all that stuff. And the Pleiadians, or the shared some technology with us. And now the Venusians, the Queen is talking to me about tachyons and various other things, and actually said that the Venusians, or the Pleiadians, had said that this creates a mini vortex that
in fact, but we should be very clear what
your own nodal point.
Exactly. What physics calls action at a distance, they say it's entanglement. What they don't know is the perfection of entanglement is the definition of phase conjugation, called embedding perfected. And in fact, what they call an Einstein-Rosen bridge, or a wormhole, or string theory, is in fact the compression node between the nodes of the longitudinal array. So once you understand this longitudinal array bit, and then that explains perfectly. Einstein got another thing wrong. He thought the speed of light was a speed limit. It ain't. The dominant measure of all velocities faster than light measured by the famous Professor Raymond Chow was between 1.5 and 1.7 times c, the speed of light, centered almost precisely on golden ratio times the speed of light. All the measurements made, which is the smoking gun proving I'm right, that the only way through the speed of light is phase conjugation by golden ratio, which is how gravity is made. So suddenly this idea of what is a tachyon is also answered precisely by phase conjugation to Planck, actually. So that implosion mechanics really solves all of these problems very coherent.
That's amazing. Tachyons are move faster than the speed of light. So it's pretty much that was mentioned by the Queen in her dissertation. So folks, I want to just encourage you again to please come to the Mount Shasta Summer Conference. We've only got about 3 weeks left. It's going to be amazing. If you'd like to experience the Quantify and the Therify system and the incredible snippet of genius of Dan Winter, you look at his site and you're going to kind of go cross-eyed and blind, but get to the heart of it, let it sink in, and you're really going to need an advanced course of physics, and you're going to have to throw out half your physics books to be understood.
Very simple to visualize a wave like a caduceus making golden ratio imploding. That's the beginning and the end. And it's all at planckfire.com, PLANCKPHIR, planckfire.com. And you have all of the graphics, all the links, and the new book. Everything's in one place, all 5 books. So thank you. And thanks for inviting me. And I look forward to being part of your conference.
Yeah, we're gonna I'm gonna try I'm gonna do a test with you if I can before. If not, we can if you want to do a separate presentation, we can play it, or we could actually just play this on the movie night that we have, Alfred Lambert.
Whatever's fun. All good. I like working with you, Rob, because you really have a lot of experience in the field to feel this as well as think about it scientifically. So I'm delighted to work with you, Rob, and be part of your group. Thank you very much. It's been really
Thank you so much for coming on the show again, ladies and gentlemen. Dan Winter, and I'd like to talk again maybe after the conference and kind of lay terms and without stuff, and just kind of get into some of your knowledge there in terms of the planetary stuff. And there's lots of things rattling around in his very organized scientific mind. So thank you so much. ThePromiseRevealed.net. Dan Winter's got 20 websites. I can't say them all, but
fractalfield.com. Thank you. Thank you.
Field.com probably has links to all of them. Thank you so much, and God bless you all, and thank you so much for listening.
Blessings, Rob. It's been great. Thank you. You have a great group. Thank you. Bye-bye.